My presentation today is, it's a new I've presented this before, but I keep on adding stuff to it. So there's some stuff here I haven't presented before and is not controversial, but I hope everyone looks at it and thinks about their own situation. I've got sort of concerns about where my fire service is heading, and I think you might have seen some of it in the questions I asked Stefan. We have a saying, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as we sort of move forward. So I think it's a conversation we probably need to have. I know my organisation does. So I've sort of looked at some novel ways to sort of make people think about that. And I'm not so sure it's right. So if it's not right, well, I'd like to have that conversation and help me sort of work it out. But there's some of our guys, some of our recruits. We certainly put a lot of effort into the live fire side of things while they're recruits, and then they don't get much else after that. So, and there's reasons for that as you'll see. But anyway, just to sort of start off, I actually have a few slides out of the report I gave when I returned back to Australia in 2008 after my second visit to Sweden, which was here for the first IFIW. We looked at the workshop, the facility and so on, but, and that was the original, I don't know if you've still got those documents, Stefan, but that was the original sort of text that accompanied what this was all about. And I won't read through it, but it was about bringing the practitioners and scientists together. Now, disclaimer, I'm a practitioner, okay? I don't have a degree in anything, certainly not in fire science. I really feel my role is to be a filter between those that are doing research and explaining phenomena, and that being that filter who can take that and make it valuable for our guys on the fire ground. That's my role as an instructor. And if I don't think it's valuable, well, you know, I'll teach something else. So, you know, I think that's my role. We have Lasse Nelson there. We had a range of instructors. Some of them are here for the 10-year reunion, some aren't. But I thought it's interesting just to very, very quickly go through what talks were given then as well. Paul Grimwood. Paul talked about the need to standardise terminology. So 10 years later, we're still having that discussion about, is it a smoke explosion, is it a fire gas ignition, is it a backdraft? In order to do this, it is critical that everyone is actually describing the same phenomena. So we're still having that conversation 10 years later. Unfortunately, Paul couldn't make it. There's another face that's here, it's already presented, Peter McBride. Guess what? Talking about the ventilation profile. 10 years later, we're starting to sort of implement that, refining it, making sense of it, okay? So we talked about that for the first time. Juan Carlos Campaña talked about this type of firefighting in Spain. One was here earlier. Another face that was here talking about the ventilation profile, the concept of ventilation-induced flashover. And now 10 years later, certainly ventilation controlled fires versus fuel controlled fires is fundamental in the education of firefighters. 10 years ago. There we have Chris Garcia, positive pressure attack. Certainly there's been a long journey over the last 10 years about where that fits into things. Certainly an effective technique under certain circumstances. But I know, just for where we stand on that, my organisation, we very much fearful of doing too much with ventilation prior to putting water on a fire, essentially where it sits with us, okay? We have Magic from Poland. Certainly Shimon told us a lot about Magic. There's Stefan Svensson. We talked about some small scale props. Stefan Morozov from the western suburbs of Paris, very influential in France. We have Ergen Ernst from Germany. Sean Raphael from Australia, once again talking about his concept of bringing this together for a rapid assessment prior to entering a fire, which has become fairly well known. We add the B in front of it now. I think that was some help from Ed. Let's have a look at what the building's doing. And we also had this gentleman, Steve Kerber, at that time working for NIST, not UL. And there's Stefan Sartquist. There is no fire triangle, okay. I looked at that picture when I was developing it and I thought, I must ask, if you sold your soul to the devil, because you've not aged in 10 years. You look exactly the same. And I'm sort of going, is that what you need to do? I've gone grey and I've got wrinkles and I'm still in excellent shape, of course, but no. But wow, and there it is. So,
you don't live in a small village in Sweden?
Yes, that's the answer. I live in a stressful city. Okay. So, like everyone else, for those who haven't been to Australia, I thought I'd sort of, all of our organisations are different. And I found this valuable when I went to the States because they don't have a real good grasp of what Australia's like. I remember doing some training in Colorado, or Wyoming, and Jason Coy, who was here earlier, he said, watch this. And he went up to one of his guys and he said, do you know much about Australia? And he goes, oh yeah, it's an island, isn't it? And he said, yes. And he said, yeah, about the size of Hawaii. And I'm sort of standing, you know. So, and he was deadly serious. But just to give you an indication, we have some huge problems in my service because we're too big. We're very slow to act, very slow to move, and that's a real problem for us. And I'll give you an indication why. Certainly there's the map, there's Australia down the bottom there. My fire service is Fire Rescue New South Wales, which is the light blue area there. We only have 11 fire services in the whole country. They're big state-run fire services. 800,000 square kilometres we cover. So how do you provide equity and consistency in training across that sort of distance? It's extremely difficult. 7 million people occupy the state and about 5 million live in that red dot. So we're the most urbanised, even though you see stories about Australia and the Great Outback, we're the most urbanised country in the world. We all live pretty much on the coast. A lot of the country is uninhabitable. So a bit about my brigade, you know, a large area. The reason I put that other figure there, that's the size of Texas. So once again, to give an indication to some of our American colleagues that it's a big state, okay? Because a lot of the time when I'm in the States, we fight fires very much in a European way. And a lot of the conversation was, well, as soon as you start talking about using 30 gallons per minute instead of 150 gallons per minute, the brain clicks into, and logically they just say, well, they must have different fires. Would that be fair enough, James? They must. It's the only thing that makes sense. And I remember writing quite a long email. I was on the panel for exterior streams for UL, Steve's panel. And I had to sort of explain, I come from a city of nearly 5 million people. It sort of looks like Western USA. It's sort of like San Francisco. We have the same buildings, the same construction, essentially. And there are different ways of doing it. So we have 11 fire services. My own fire service has both part-time paid and full-time. We call them retained, based on the British system. The retained name comes from, they got a retainer. Even though you don't turn out, you get a small sum each month for providing that service. We have 339 fire stations, 6,800 firefighters. Across that well, from the red dot to drive at high speed, it's about 12 hours to get out of the state. So if you know Sean Raffel, he's in the next state, the dark red one above Queensland. For me to go and see Sean, it's 1,000 kilometres. So we have some advantages of being a big service. We're all wearing the same badge. We try and do the things the same way. We have the same doctrine, but providing training that's equitable across the board is very difficult. That's what Sydney looks like. Once again, I'm back in operations now, by the way. I spent the last 15 years in training, but I'm back in operations for the last year and a half, and this presentation is very much about my journey back to operations and what it means to me. I think this has got a pointer, Carol. Yeah. There we go. I'm in charge of 14 stations somewhere just in there. Very busy zone. We've got a lot of diverse people there, a lot of Middle Eastern, Indian and Chinese. A lot of light industry, old light industry, so we're quite a busy area. Okay, in terms of my journey just in firefighting in general, this picture here, what date would you think that picture's taken from? I mean, it's a fire engine, so they had the internal combustion engine, but that's 1936. Okay. Very traditional. That uniform is very British. It has the brass buttons and the belt and axe. Woolen trousers, top boots, and a metal helmet. What date do you think that is? Any guess? The young guy there? That's when I was young and happy and didn't have a care in the world. It's 1991. I joined in 1987, and I'm actually wearing exactly the same uniform that we not only wore in 1936, that we wore in 1885. The only difference was a metal helmet. That metal helmet left our service in 1963, and I had a very lightweight plastic helmet. No flash hoods, gardening gloves, all of that sort of stuff, and yet we fought fires and put them out. So in the same period, well, firstly, why don't even question that for a start? Because that's what firefighters wore. And every firefighter I'd ever seen wore that uniform, right? I'm in a big bubble, okay? And it's a long way away from everyone else. So we did what we did, but in the same period, other industries had gone from no flying to space shuttle, okay? So that culture and tradition, I mean, we can sort of, and I think we sort of take some cheap shots at the US about that, but essentially every fire service has these traditions and cultures which we hang on for so long. And for us, the uniform was always substandard. When I came here to Sweden in 2002, I suddenly wore, for the first time in my career, a substantial uniform. It was like space age to me, the RB90, okay? And they're actually protecting areas of them that were important to protect. And I had a radio that I could click into here and press this, and I heard people talk, right? We used to have this we used to have this radio, and we just said its range was how far you could throw it. If I wanted to talk to someone, their back was to me, you'd just try and hit them with it, but it was intrinsically safe. Just didn't have a lot of power, so you know, we dealt with that. I sort of get the intrinsically safe if you sort of have an ignition source you don't want, but when you're fighting fires, there's sort of a fire there. Like, the least of my worries was it was intrinsically safe. I just wanted to talk to people. And we only had 2 radios and a crew, so the guys actually smoke diving, in your sense, they had no radio. The boss outside and the motor driver, who were standing next to each other, both had radios, so they could talk to each other. Yeah. So how did it start for me? Just once again, very quickly, I need to set this scene because it plays out later on. I read a book called Fog Attack in the late 90s as a young officer, and if you can get that free PDF on the internet if you do a search. I highly recommend it. Is it dated? Well, not really. You need to read it. It's a history. And essentially the book, it was an investigation of all different fire services around the world, a comparison. If they have this density of population, how many ladders might they have? How do they fight fires? What do they think is appropriate? But a large section of it was about the new firefighting coming out of Scandinavia, and in particular Sweden. And I'm reading through this and my eyes are getting bigger and I'm sort of saying, we're not doing any of this. And at that stage, I'd been in the job for about 15 years. I was pretty cocksure of myself. I'd been to lots of fires. I had experience, and yet I didn't know any of this stuff. So I contacted Paul email and I said, my exact words were, I didn't know Paul. I just emailed him. I explained who I was. My exact question was, who is the best guy in Sweden? Okay. And he answered with Niels Bergström, who's in the room at the back. Okay. Please talk to this guy if you get the chance. And I don't want to make it awkward or embarrass you, Nissa, but incredibly influential in where I went from here. The famous saying, don't burn to learn, warm to inform. I don't think anyone knows that in CFBT anymore. When they damage equipment and melt helmets and think they're doing the right thing inside live fire props. The first time I went to Belgium, there's a line of helmets and they're all damaged. All the Gallet helmets have melted visors on them. They were all the instructors' helmets. So what, we've got 6 instructors that can't control 6 sheets of chipboard here. That's what it's telling me, right? It's not a sign of how good you are or how hot you can make it. It's a sign that you can't control a small fire to get some learning outcomes to help better train people. So after that, there's no more damaged helmets in Belgium, because you judge the person's ability to be instructed by their ability to control the fire and get the learning outcomes you want for your training. Yeah. We don't damage gear like that in a real fire, so why are we damaging it in training? It doesn't make any sense. Less is more. I think that's sometimes forgotten in practice inside containers where you're trying to yap, and neutral, and all the students hearing is blah, 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 neutral plane, blah, blah, blah. They're trying to concentrate and look, let them enjoy the experience. Debrief well and pre-brief well. And the biggest thing that got me was highly skilled with the nozzle, which I think is absolutely a dying art in our occupation. The first time I was in a container, and that's Nisa on the fog fighter. I'm sort of off to the corner here. No need to put it in context or anything. It just is what it is. We were talking, examining things. I was getting my mind blown away. I'm watching a guy just telling the fire what to do. My whole career, I just reacted to this stuff. I didn't know what it was going to do next. We were taught to hold our water until we saw flame. Otherwise, it would be steam, water damage, and loss of visibility. And when you're wearing a substandard uniform, all of those things are true. So I get my first chance. Helping me adjust it. And we had a couple of sessions like that. I can't remember how many, but it was good fun. Look, there's Nisa advancing on the fire. A thin stream, we've got direct attack, we've got some flame cooling, we've got some gas cooling, we're putting the water in the right place. And, very humbling for a guy that thought he knew a lot of stuff about firefighting. I knew nothing about firefighting. My role when I came back was essentially to introduce whatever that was into my own fire service, and that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 15 years. I went to England after that to look at implementation and so on. The English are very good at writing good documents, so that was very beneficial. Over the years, I've visited a number of countries to get outside of my bubble. I had one of my young instructors come up to me only a couple of months ago, and he said, what do I need to do? And I said, you need to get out of Australia, travel, see other, talk, have that conversation. If you've got young guys like that, we need to develop them. I think someone was talking about that earlier. Get out of your country. That's the first thing you've got to do, get out of your country. We've got James from the States here. He's on his own dime, right? Like most of you guys, or, why? Why are you here, James?
To learn.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a long way to travel, So, and in the process, in classes that I've been lucky enough to teach, we've had a whole range of different countries to learn from, to see different perspectives and so on. Turkey, Duan, who was, he's been to a number of the IFIW meetings. He learnt English just so he could be a better firefighter. He learnt English because most of the literature is in English, right? How's that? I speak one language and I don't speak that very well. I speak Australian, my English is okay. That's the sort of dedication, which I don't think is even recognised in his own country. Would you say, Carol?
I think so.
Yeah. He's a young officer. My return from training to operations, which happened a year and a half ago, and you can imagine 15 years in training, I go back to operations, but not in the role that I was in before I left for training. I was a station officer when I started training, worrying about my crew. Now I've got 14 stations, and I'm going to be sending them into burning buildings, right? So suddenly it got real pretty quickly. There's some of my guys there. It's a funny picture, actually, in a sense. There's still some ramifications of that picture, or that incident. That was just a kilometre down from the station, not even that, 500 or 600 metres. We fought a fire there. I arrive. A couple of seats, unusual in that there was a couple of seats of ignition inside. There was 2 fires inside. They put them out. They sort of take the pick in that. I go back to my office and get a phone call. While that fire was happening, their station was broken into. And as it turns out, the fire was set so they could break into the station. So a little bit of a side story there. I mostly have young guys and girls in my command. It's not a place where most people live or can afford to live. Or Sydney's not a place you can afford to live. You know, so basically, I would now be leading many of the firefighters that I trained as recruits and new officers over the last decade. I went to my first fire, and they'd already knocked it down. Room of origin. Our fires, because we have lightweight construction, we don't have double or triple glazing normally. On arrival, we will have one room fully involved, most likely. Okay, which sort of speeds us up a little bit, because our time span to sort of deal with that before she's into the next adjacent room or down the hallway, it's pretty tight. But they'd knocked it down. So getting back to that, our ability to quickly implement interior fire attack is fairly important still for us, at least. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll just hang on to that thought. So yeah, I turn up to the fire. They're sort of sitting around. We had 3 or 4 pumps there, and I could identify every single person there I'd trained as a recruit. You know, yeah. So coming up, I don't know your name. Last year, no, that was 4 years ago, sir. Right. So, and that was my bubble in training, and suddenly I was now responsible in no small way for their safety and well-being. In training, they all came to me. We did a good gig, and then see you later. Who we got tomorrow? And they came in and went out and came in. And now these are my guys. And I wanted to know what they were capable of. Because if I get that wrong, I put them in great danger. If the station officer gets it wrong, he puts him in great danger. Right? So that's sort of what I started. I wanted to know what they were capable of. What concerned me most was we'd never had a recruit come back to training for refresher training that were better than when they left as a recruit. They were wiser, they were more comfortable in that environment, they were probably lazier. But that actual task level skills, when they left us after 3 weeks of live fire training, of drilling and using hose, they never came back with skills better than that. And that's a worry. So what was happening between them getting trained and starting their career and going to fires? There were so many other things they had to do. Was that taking their time away from that? There was prevention, rescue, hazmat, incident command. All of our officers, every course, 99% incident command. We're pretty good at that now. We can get the right chess pieces in the right place, and we can have some other chess pieces in reserve. We're pretty good at that. But once we're set up, that doesn't put the fire out. It's the guys and girls on the ground with a hose in their hand or whatever piece of equipment is appropriate who are putting the fire out. Those task level skills. And when things turn to shit, it's their ability to perform those task level skills well that gets them out of the shit. Yeah? Well, this is what I'm thinking, because I'm sending them into burning buildings now. Yeah? So where does the risk lie if we've got a whole lot of other stuff? And that's one of our recruits. Steely 1,000-yard stare there. The other thing that's been a little bit insidious insidious is probably too strong a word, but this constant sort of, don't worry too much about fires, there's other stuff that's more important, or we're doing more of, there's other calls that you're getting now. There's less fires than you ever got before, you know. Most of our job is something else. And if you hear that enough, what sort of priority are you going to put on moving a hose down a hallway, right? Now, every day I get an email that tells me what incidents we had for the day before. Every duty commander gets it. And I started looking at this very closely. So what I did, I pulled 3 days in a row in July 2018, right? Now, I'm just going to dance through this, but you can see the format of it, right? So these are 3 days. Now, in those 3 consecutive days, my organisation turned out to 1,075 emergency calls. Now, of those calls, if you start to sort of sift through it, about 350 on average, on a daily average, but what do you think the most common call was? I didn't give you a lot of time to look at that data for a reason. What do you think the most common call we turned out to over those 3 days? Yep, automatic fire alarms. Let's push them to the side. Next. EMS? Nope, we don't do EMS. We do medical assist if the ambulance call us for extra expertise or manpower. Fire, right? It's fire. So, 315 of those were fires, representing 29% of the calls. So it could be argued, or it's true to say, that a firefighter has more chance of attending something else rather than a fire, 71%. And that has been the narrative that we just hear day and day again. You have more chance of doing something else than going to a fire. Now, how does that affect the mindset that says, should I go out now and spend an hour practicing on the hose lines? Probably not. Now, I don't think there's one thing that affects this. I think it's a number of things. But I can't help but think that's one of the issues we have. What do you think was the next most common call?
NBCs. Motor vehicle.
Yeah, so rescues or hazmats were the next. Actually, over those 3 days, it was hazmats was 7.6, 82 hazmat calls. Now, these could range from anything from just an alert or a white powder incident to a major catastrophe. Just like the fires could be a bin or a fifth alarm warehouse fire. The next one was rescues, 5.6%. Once again, they could be oil on roadway or they could be an actual lengthy extrication. So it could be argued that, you know, if you want to look at the statistics a slightly different way, that while one could argue that we could spend 3 times the effort and time actively engaged in training and all the other things we do other than fires, that's one way of looking at it, 71%. Or another way of looking at it is, you have 3 times the chance of going to a fire than the next most common call. In fact, with those 3 days, you had 4 or 5 times more chance of going to a fire than any other single thing we do. Now that puts a different spin on it. Should we be spending 3 or 4 times more times training in fire than we do rescue or hazmat? Or maybe we already do. Certainly not on a hose line we don't, not at the task level, right? How many of your fire stations do you see out working those hoses and getting that right? Right? We have dedicated rescue stations. I have 2. One of them is the busiest rescue station in New South Wales, actually. Do I have to tell those guys to cut a car up or to train rescue? Nope. There's a level of accountability that says, I'm not going to be that guy who can't get that door off. I can't go defensive now. I can't wait for another hose line. Maybe that's part of the problem as well. So what I looked at was, this presentation is really about my ongoing program or experiment to try and get to the bottom of that. I wanted to create with my crews a unifying philosophy that will drive both operational performance and station-based training. So drive their performance, but also suggest to them and to prioritise what they think is important to be successful on the fire ground. In essence, it's the result of a 16-year journey that started with fire behaviour training in Sweden in 2002. Yeah. So I looked at 5 ways to do that, and this is an experiment. It may not be a very good experiment, it may not even give me what I want, but first I wanted the guys to look at themselves and ask themselves who they are, because I think a lot of firefighters are delusional. And I think it helps our mental health to be delusional. Because if we keep on going to calls where we haven't been prepared for, how else do you survive that? You kid yourself that it's going to be okay. Yeah? What is appropriate in terms of my capability? How do we deal with WH&S, work health and safety, with our job? Okay? Sharing expectations. Does the officer know what the guys are capable of? If they get that wrong, we're going to have trouble. At the very least, we'll increase risk. And then, once we've identified all that, what back to basics training do we need to do? So there's one of our CAFs pumps. We've got a couple of, 1 in 4 of ours are CAFs, which I think is a pretty good mix. We use them a lot in the bushfire interface. We're sort of trained as the fire front's coming, no, maybe, and then we might try and help that house. We can't put it out, there's not enough water. It's like in Canada, yeah, the weather puts it out eventually, or it changes, or it just runs out of fuel. But with the CAFs, we've got a bit more of an option now to coat it you know, and a bit of wet than dry, than just someone with their hose doing this. And we can cut a fire break, so it's a very effective medium for that. And those sort of rubbish fires, very effective medium. So the first question was, who am I? Now, can everyone tell me what movie that's out of? If you can't, please get up and leave the room. I'm talking to the wrong people if you haven't seen this, right? Sorry? Yeah.
The right stuff?
Yeah, there's a... That came out in 1991. I remember it because I joined in 1987, so I'm a young firefighter in the pumper driving around, and that is on every billboard and every bus shelter. And we are living the dream, right? That movie is doing such a great stuff for my personal life. It was a good time to be a firefighter. But how do we live up to this expectation? I don't think any firefighters told them what I'm about to show you wasn't true either, right? Here's the promo for the movie, if you haven't seen it. That's why we have door entry. Obviously. Or without any smoke or breathing apparatus, or so it reminds me of a job I had last week. No, it's we sell this stuff to the public, and look, they have no reason not to believe it. So, but I think too many firefighters believe their own hype as well. Now we have a modern version of that, yeah, and we're all a little bit implicit in this, you know, this sort of stuff. These memes, and they tend to sort of come from a single place, but what does that do to the mindset of young firefighters? Why do we need to pump our tyres up? We have that saying, pumping our tyres up. I'm pretty sure other occupations don't do this. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. You know, do we have a plumber's meme or a carpenter's meme about how good they are? And, you know, yeah, it'd be the bicycle crack down here as we're bending over the... you know, but if this is sort of, you know, if some element of our organisation thinks this is what it's about, I mean, it's going to affect the way they view risk, certainly, yeah. Some men don't want to see the world burn. What you call a hero, I just call doing my job. It's really awkward, but your Facebook feed is just assaulted by this crap, right? It's 1991 again, where, you know. So once again, you know, what do your firefighters think about this? Do they have Facebook pages where they put this up? You know? So once again, it's about piecing together the jigsaw puzzle for me and my guys, and I wanted them to know what this job's really about. Now, some of you will know the little video going in the corner here. That's a fire. Well, firstly, you know, we have some fire dynamic simulator here. It's done a sort of, that's a line of duty death actually. That's a simulation of 3 dead firefighters and 3 dead children in Keokuk, Iowa. It starts in a kitchen fire. That's showing the temperature of the fire gases, the smoke. I'm going to call it fire gases because I want to annoy Peter. And it flashes over into the living room, and then into the lounge room, and then up the stairs. Firefighter killed on the top holding a baby and so on. I mean, it's tragic. How long do you think they spent inside that structure before that happened? It was 5 minutes. What do you think they were doing in that 5 minutes? Just going up and attacking the fire and putting water on the fire in the kitchen, or what were they? They were searching. There was things to be done. When I joined, first crew in searched. First crew in searched. Someone else will bring a hose in later on. We'll deal with that as we get. We've got to get in there and start looking for people. Yeah. So videos like this can take hours, days. Stefan, how long would it take to generate that on a powerful computer? A few days, right? Carol tells me of doing his fire safety stuff in Brussels, and they're going to put the ventilation fans in the new subway. How big do the fans have to be so X amount of people can escape if there's a train fire in X amount of time? Well, you can't simulate it for real, so puts it in the simulator, runs it, tries to get some answers. The more complex it is, the less likely that data is even correct. How long did your computer run for?
2 months.
2 months. Computer sits in the corner and runs for 2 months. One of my young officers in the middle of my city has a train fire in the subway. He hasn't got 2 months to get some idea. He's got tens of seconds, right? Now, if that's not the hardest job in the world, I don't know what is. But on the other hand, some guys think that this can just be done by the seat of your pants, right? It's not that hard. Just put the water on the wet stuff on the red stuff. It is the hardest job in the world. We got a new assistant director of training just before I left. He was a brigadier general in the Australian Army. He'd spent the last 4 years in Afghanistan, Iraq, training the Australian soldiers. He's just looked straight through you, this guy. He's the real stuff. And I sent him an email, and somehow I said, sir, we do the most difficult job in the world. He sort of replied to it, and he said very nicely, he said, but I'm not sure about that comment you made on page 3 or whatever. His guys are getting shot at and bombs and all that, you know, and I think he took it a bit personally, but I said, look, we do the most difficult job in the world to do well is probably a better way to do it, you know. If you want to be a shitty firefighter, you'll retire. You've got more chance of dying if you're a taxi driver, I'd suspect, or working construction. But that potential in our job is always there, right? So to do well, it is the most difficult job in the world. And like I said before, I think my role is to try and filter some of that stuff and prioritise it because we can't be an expert in everything. So now I've got my 14 stations, which I'm really interested in how they're going to deal with something like this. It's an American house, but look, we have a ton of these things. You know, it's just lightweight construction. There'll be single pane glass. By the time we arrive, we'll have one room fully involved, windows probably broken. Not an uncommon, right? Now that can be a really easy fire, a really difficult fire, right? And I'm going to try and keep it really simple, but it should be reasonable to expect that anyone in any given organisation, if they have good doctrine and good training, it doesn't matter who they are, they should attack that the same way or a similar way. So let's say we've got universe A and universe B in some alternate universes. The other thing I'm doing, I'm sending out young officers. We have this LF, leading firefighter rank, who can act up to station officer. So I'm sending them all around Sydney. I can send them 2 hours north to a fire station. So I'm sending a young firefighter who's just made officer, sub-officer rank, if you like, and then suddenly he gets that. Does he know how the crew is going to attack that? Because, you know, he may get, that's the crew he gets, right? He's got the crusty old veterans. You know what? Most of those will walk in and they'll see 3 stripes on the shoulder and they'll breathe a sigh of relief. Why will they breathe a sigh of relief? He's experienced. He's going to know what to do. That's my first crew, actually. Georgie Shepherd was the station officer. Extremely experienced. Wonderful guy. And the other guy was our senior firefighter. Yes. Once more, George is the fat guy. Okay. So what did he expect? Let's say he turns up to this fire here. What are our issues here? We've obviously got a decent fire burning in it. If you look down the side, you can probably see it's blown out down the back there. We've got the hallway starting to fill. It's coming out with some velocity. The smoke's obviously hot. It's lifting up straight away. There's some colour to it. It's ventilation controlled. We've got a ton of options, really. But you know what? One of those options is just to go down that hallway and put it out. Right? Let's just say they decide to do that. The other concern is there's a car in the driveway, so maybe there's some people in there. We don't know, right? That's a whole nother discussion which I won't do today, but okay, so these guys, He rocks up and he says, okay, you guys, I want that hose line down the hallway, put the fire out. While he goes to the power, isolates the power and starts his 360, which are standard things that our officers must do. In fact, they must send a radio message to say they've done those things. So he sets off on a 360, the hose line's going in. What are those guys doing? Well, they're probably like this. And they're taking a hammering. Where's the smoke? It's down here, it's hot. Why are they standing up? Because it's easier, sort of. The knees, and that's how we've always done it. These guys have been trained, right? Are they gas cooling? Are they trying to control that environment, do you think? No, probably not. Why? Because they never did that before. And they're not getting certain cues. Yeah, maybe it's not that hot. I'm not seeing any flames around the ceiling. Because you know what? They got one session at this, right? So halfway down, they're taking a beating. They're banging into stuff. They can't see anything. They're trying to drag that hose. You okay? Yeah, keep going. Bang, bang. Halfway down the hallway, they make a really good decision. What do you reckon that is? They just leave. They just back out. The 360's been completed. The guy comes up and goes, what happened? There's stuff coming off them and a little bit of melted here. First he's thinking, wow, these guys put in. Too hot, boss. We'll have to go defensive. Does he call bullshit on that? No, okay, guys, get that around here, get that around. And they put the house out. I arrive. I see the house heavily damaged. I see the guys, a bit of damaged gear. I'm going, what happened? Oh no, we went offensive. We had to pull back and go defensive. The guys had a good shot. Oh, excellent. Anyone hurt? No, great. Okay, then wait a minute. I see the media. I better go and have a talk to the media. What do I tell the media? You guys have all done it before. It was an inferno. I'm telling the media this, right? That is the same picture from that house as well. So at some point in the near future after that first picture, that happened, right? And it was always going to happen. Our officers are doing an equation. They have a look at it. They use their experience and fire behaviour knowledge and say, do I think they can go in there and put water on the fire before it gets too bad? If the answer is yes, we send them in. But what if you get that equation wrong, right? So anyway, I tell them that within minutes of them entering, the fire erupted and spread rapidly through the house, and despite the bravery of the firefighters, they were forced from the structure. Luckily, no one was home. Unfortunately, the house was totally destroyed, but adjacent properties were saved. The crews battled against incredible odds, but the fire was just too hot. I'm off. The people whose house it is will thank me and thank them, right? What about if he turns up to a station and it's this guy, straight out of academy, right? Exactly the same thing, but when he sees him or two of him or her, what's the LF thinking when he arrives at the station? Is he a bit worried? Yeah, absolutely. I've got two new guys. I can't trust them. I don't know what's going to happen. Well, anyway, they get the same fire. And he goes, you know what? They're wearing this uniform. They should be able to do it. I've got no other alternative. You're going down the hallway. These guys, straight down. They control it a little bit. They throw some water into the smoke. They're like rats up a drain pipe. They can see everything. They get to the room of origin and they put it out. He finishes his 360, comes to the front door. They're also coming out. He's looking at it. What's he thinking now? It wasn't a very bad fire. It was exactly the same fire. And I often say, give me two of those recruits that I've just trained any day over the old guys or experienced guys or whatever we're going to call them, solely because I know what they're going to do, right? Then I arrive and I tell another story, right? Within minutes of them entering, they quickly advanced on the fire, keeping it isolated to the kitchen area. This was followed by a rapid search of the living. Luckily, the firefighters used their training experience to make sure damage was kept to a minimum. That probably doesn't make the paper, right? Because one, they wouldn't have that picture. That never happened. So we build these realities. Now, the old crew's back there. They're telling their story. There's a hot one. Gee, look at Bob's helmet. They're building this reality that says they did everything possible, they really hung it out there, but guess what? They lacked capability. What are the two young blokes saying? Oh, it's sort of like training. We sort of went down the hallway like we did in training and we threw some water around and we put it out. No one's even saying anything. The older guys are saying, well, it couldn't be much of a fire because you guys are new, right? So all of these things are sort of build this sort of culture and tradition of respecting experience, but still not sharing the same expectations. If those experienced guys turn up to this and they're rescue guys, I can guarantee they know every piece of equipment on that truck. The level of accountability becomes a level of expertise. I have this saying, and it's terrible, but it's true, I think, because I was one of those guys. Firefighters rise to a level of mediocrity that avoids further scrutiny. I will be good enough that I won't be scrutinised. No one will know that I'm not good enough. Because we do that to survive. We prioritise because there's so many things we have to be good at. Well, that level of mediocrity becomes so high, it's actually expertise. They know if the AMBO turns to them and says, if we don't get them out, they're not going to make it. They know there's no, I can't go defensive on this now. There's not another hose line coming in to clean up. It does matter if it burns down, and everyone's looking. Who's looking when you're in a smoke-filled house? No one, right? So all of these things start to put the fire in a different area that are other stuff. A motor vehicle entrapment doesn't eventually go out if our skills are lacking. Same with the hazmat. So I started looking at ways to sort of get into the heads of my guys, and basically the easiest way to do that is I asked that they're the firefighter they want to turn up to their house, and everything becomes much clearer. Do you want the first crew to turn up to your house or the second crew? Every single crew I've talked to this about says we want the second crew. Okay, which crew are you? Then we have silence. We can make you the second crew, and we're starting to look at ways to do that. We're setting some expectations, right? There's one of Raymond's colleagues. When we were doing some training in Hong Kong, we had a fire and we turned out to it. Amazing use of the ladders between all of the wires and stuff. This concept established a benchmark which all firefighters should gauge their own performance. First, they've got to know who they are and motivation on the fire ground. At what point is good enough if it's your house? In my state, someone with this badge is coming. If you're happy that it takes 2 minutes to mask up, well, you can be that guy. If you're happy for someone else to turn up to your house and be that guy. If it's okay to kink a hose, if it's okay to have a big patch on it because you couldn't be bothered putting new hose. When we did the training, I'd say, where is the very best hose at your station? Where do you think it was? In the storeroom, right? We waited till the dirty old hose with a couple of patches on it self-destructed, then we went and got the good hose. I don't want someone coming to my house with hose that could burst. It's just simple stuff, right? And this is, I suspect, fairly universal. So what is appropriate? We know our window of opportunity in which to positively impact is smaller. Everyone tells us that. We know that's the case. Our ability to make quick decisions and implement our strategies and tactics in a timely manner is much shorter, right? And mastery of the basic skill sets that have evolved to control the modern fire environment can define the difference between a safe or unsafe workplace. I just want my guys to be safe, right? I want to know what they're doing. So what is appropriate? How quickly should we be able to size up? Take long enough and every fire is going to be defensive. It has to be if you take long enough. What about how quickly should we don our SCBA? How quickly should we be able to move? If a station officer or an officer in charge is sending someone into a burning building and they don't know how quickly they can move through a smoke-filled fire environment, don't send them in. Because how can you possibly make the equation fit, right? How quickly should we be able to find and extinguish a certain fire? So I'll go through this very quickly, but 38 questions to 57 instructors from around the world. I ask certain questions because I'm saying, am I the one that's being unrealistic here? So just a couple of ones here. You know, with no visible victims and no information of possible victim location, will the first line in be fire attack or search and rescue? Now you can say depends all you like, but that's the info you got, right? Now if I'm sending someone into a burning fire and I think they're going to go on the fire, but halfway down the hallway they start searching, I'm going to have problems because my fire's not going to go out, right? Fire attack, search and rescue. 30 years ago, I would say that would be the opposite. So I think we're getting somewhere. We realise we have to stop whatever's happening. Is rescue our most valid objective? Absolutely. But how we achieve that's different to what we did in the past. Should they gas cool? Yes. Now that's to American, the majority of people I ask are American firefighters. They gas cool too, it's just different, right? Mightn't be as effective, in our opinion, just different. Would aggressive ventilation commence? Well, this is sort of interesting. I suspect that would have been different, certainly in the States, right? But we still have this yes as soon as we arrive. There's still a blue bit there, right? That's the sort of impact that research that UL's been doing has had. Would you put a hose in from outside? Most of them say yes now. I'm a blue guy, always, including with crews inside, but that's another presentation. But certainly we're looking at putting water in as being advantageous. Direct attack, indirect. This is where I get on the funny ground. It's probably lucky I've only got 10 minutes to go, because managing risk is a difficult conversation because it's tribal, right? Politically, everything's tribal now. Are you right? Are you left? It's really hard to be in the middle. Then you're traded to both sides. So this is sort of what I'm thinking, right? So I'm going to put a warning up, so I'm not misquoted. It's a difficult conversation. The following conversation is conceptual and could be viewed as a gross generalization. There's the first, right? I'm talking about two ends of a spectrum as well. Everyone fine with that, right? So just work with me on this one. I think we've got two tribes. Tribe 1 has been around for a long time, believes firefighting to be a noble calling where the life of the firefighter is secondary to the public they serve. It promotes courage, loyalty, respect and experience. It respects physical prowess, your ability to use the tools, to advance a hose line. That gets you kudos. It is slow to change, right? We probably have that picture of a traditional firefighter. Then we have this guy. Tribe 2 is the new tribe and believes firefighting to be a profession, not a calling, profession, where the life of the firefighter is as important as the public they serve. It promotes curiosity, science, change and knowledge. It respects mental prowess. Now these are ones, I'm describing two ends of the spectrum. They're not mutually exclusive, of course, right? Is too quick to change. Once again, I'm throwing that out there. Too quick to change. So, these aren't necessarily things they have, but they're fundamental ideals driving their behaviour, perhaps. Because they're good things, right? But which one's driving your behaviour more, and perhaps even driving the way you train, or what you expect, or how you manage risk? Now, if we have a look at this, we've probably got people's, you know, which side are you guys on? You're blue? Are you yellow? Are you somewhere in between? Right? I think that, you know, once again, I'm trying to sort of make sense of this for my guys, but I suspect that we join them together and we've got green in the middle, probably a pretty good place to be, right? So if you ask me, where am I, right? I would have said I was there. Now I'd probably say I'm there because I see a bit of a gap there. I see a lack of respect for some of the things that made our firefighters want to be better at some of these task level skills, some of this physical prowess, right? The pendulum's gone a little bit far this way. And I think it's a very difficult place to be, right? So once again, I'm just think about these things. I'm trying to come up with some sort of answer to why we don't respect expertise on the hose line or firefighting, but we do respect it in rescue or so on. So how do we articulate our lawful occupation in health and safety? And this is a real easy one, but a real tough one, right? Every worker has a right to a safe workplace. In Australia, if I don't do that, I'm breaking the law, right? So, managing risk. Here's another warning. Here's the second one. I'm going to generalise because I'm trying to float some ideas here. The following conversation is conceptual and could be viewed as a gross generalisation, but I believe should be discussed and debated by every officer. If you're a senior officer and you're not having this conversation, what are your guys thinking? Right? Okay, let's go. Who knows that one? Right? Everyone heard that one? Do you agree with it? It's general, yeah. But I don't mind general things. He said that, I'm sure, and I've only met the man once, a fabulous he's doing that so guys don't do silly stuff. It's to stop, it's to make people stop and actually sort of, and don't do silly stuff. In our occupation, in our fire service, it basically got changed into that sort of, which is sort of similar. We'll risk a lot to save lives, Similar, Peter? Yeah. Risk a little to save property. We'll still have a go if we can do it super safe. And risk nothing that's already lost. The building's already through the roof, right? I don't like either of those. So I'll just throw it out there, right? Because it just misses too much for me. Your level of competency and ability to perform a task effectively and safely doesn't miraculously improve because there's a victim inside. That's what I'm worried about. There's a victim inside, therefore we must take more risk. Suddenly, I'm that guy. I've got all the skills, I've got all the stuff. No, it doesn't miraculously increase. It's going to be what it was before that happened. So we're going to get a mismatch. At any given time, it is what it is. But traditionally, the presence of victims may have served to dictate fireground tactics to a greater degree than the prevailing fire conditions. Certainly in my occupation, in my service, these are beautiful painting of our guys back in the past, wearing the same uniform that I wore when I joined. This is not managing risk, but increasing risk and exposing a mismatch between achieving valid objectives and firefighter capability. That's what I think that saying does, if you want to be the devil's advocate. So, if you want to rescue people and offset risk, just become more capable. That's what it should say. I say to my SOs, I don't care if your guys suck. You just have to know they suck. If you don't know they suck, you're going to put them in danger and you're going to get your heart broken. I thought they were going to do this. I thought they were going to be okay. Right? Tough talks with my station officers. So, I'm going to go through quick. We have strategies. We have tactics. We're going to go through that door, not that door. We're going to put a stream in perhaps. Then we have task level skills, the physical and mental skill sets. The IC sets the first two. If we get them all right, safe workplace, success at endeavour, low risk. If we get one of them wrong, this changes, right? And so on. But if the IC doesn't know what the skill set is, he's going to get that one wrong every time. He or she is going to get it wrong every time. Or run the risk of getting it wrong, right? Unless we've got shared expectations. So who sets the expectations? Really quickly, we set them during training. They don't know any different. The instructor tells them what they've got to do. It gets validated here. There's the breakdown. If it doesn't get validated to the first fire station they go to, it's gone, right? This is perfect model. And in the background, we have some research and stuff going on which validates. We have operational experience. So too complex, too much science. I'll go through this very quickly. That's not good. That's where we came from. Robots, no understanding and so on. But you can also go too far that way. I think Ricardo was talking about some of those. You know, what's really important? Here's the one, gas cooling. Fundamental for us because we never did it before. Synonymous with the new European fighting, for us anyway. After 15 years of teaching it, I end up with this bell curve, right? These guys aren't doing it, ever. They're not very good at much at the bottom of the bell curve, right? These guys, all the time. Success, experience, majority are here. Good firefighters, why? Well, if I ask them, are you going to gas cool at your next fire? What do you think the answer is? Think of your own firefighters.
They're going to smoke.
If you say you're going to smoke / gas cool at your next fire, what are they going to say? Yes. Will they say yes? They'll say it depends. And it's the right answer, right? Theoretically. And I go, depend on what? Well, if it's too hot. Well, what if it's about mixture more than heat? Well, how do you know how hot it is? You've got a 10-foot ceiling. If there's flames running the ceiling, because that's what they saw in the container, I'll do it then. What they're really saying is, no, I'm not going to, right? So we had this problem when differences between what you should and what you don't have to can be indistinguishable. And I want to get to a video here. We realize depends is good. We realize standard approaches are good. Somewhere in the middle, we've got some stuff. We want you to be innovative, think outside the box, be versatile and intuitive, but some things are non-negotiable. I've got a document on this, so I'll go through the rest really quick. But what do we think is non-negotiable? I went to each crew I went to and I said to the boss, I said, why would you send someone offensive into that structure we had before? What's the answer? if I think they can be safe. Everyone says it. Right answer. So what things are they doing? Or put it another way, if they didn't do certain things, you wouldn't send them in, yeah? Yeah. If they can't control the interior environment, I wouldn't send them in. So we wanted to sort of identify what that was. So what would that crew do that would make the offensive option safe and effective? Or another way of looking at it, if you knew a crew would not do certain things, would you still go offensive? Right? Then I asked the crew, what are the 4 things you think the boss wants you to do or he won't send you in? Right? We eventually came up with, and this is a long conversation, we're going to stay low. Not just because it's hot. If you battle like this until they're halfway down the hallway and your uniform is drenched, you just don't get low and keep going, you leave. It's not an option to say, I'll get low just when it's too hot. You're ineffective in a number of ways, right? There's a ton of reasons that got nothing to do with heat, why it's better to stay down low, right? Next thing was we're going to control the flow path. We care what the air does. Maybe that's just good door entry. Maybe it's just halfway down the hallway they hear a window break and know that's not good. And they react a little bit quicker. That's controlling the flow path or thinking about the flow path, right? There were Canadians there too, doing some smoke cooling. Did you see the helmet? Yeah. Cooling the fire gases, non-negotiable. I say to my guys, what is the consequence if you gas cool when you didn't need to? It's nothing. 0, right? You've walked more crap in on your boots. What is the consequence if you should have and you didn't? It could be dire. So just do it, right? It's a simple one. Instead of having a big question mark saying, oh, I don't know. So this video here, actually part of the Canadian project. We're going to advance down the hallway. Steve Brisbois, where is he? Steve? Steve and myself. We've got a room fully involved. We're going to come down the hallway, visibility 0. It's about what, 5 meters, Steve? Yeah. Yep. We're going to cool, some long, some a little shorter. We're flying about 200 litres per minute. Can't see anything. Where we're low, we're controlling the flow path, we're cooling the gases, we're sharing some info. Steve throws the tick up, right, okay, we're back on track. Okay, we're going to come to the room and we're just going to put it out. These are the sort of videos that we worked on for the Canadian project to give firefighters an example. There's the room and it gets an indirect attack. There's a nice extinguishing, right? It's knocked down with the indirect attack, efficient use of water. What's going to follow? I'm going to look in the tick, I'm going to put some direct surface cooling on, and we're overhauling. 35 seconds down the hall. Now, if I'm an SO and I think they've got a couple of minutes, well, a crew that can do it in 35 and do those things, I'm sending them in. They're not going to break my heart. So we start to set some shared expectations. And the last one was put water on the fire as soon as possible. Now, the reason I've got all these things hanging off as I finish up here, right? And I'll just say this first. My non-negotiables rely on a firefighter that has received theoretical training in modern fire dynamics, realistic practical live fire training in the tactics and techniques, and ongoing maintenance. Right? Not much to expect, yeah? This was all of those things that you saw. I'll just go back here. All of those things that you saw on this page here. That's the last page of the document I'm giving you guys. But what you'll notice is, here's the 4 non-negotiables, here's the theoretical component and the practical components. And what I found out was, and I had one of my officers do this, you'll see his name in the document, you'll see his name at the bottom. Everything I've ever taught in firefighting falls under one of those, right? So it became the basis of, where do we need to improve? You pick your stuff you want to learn about and we'll do it, right? But there's a PDF, I think, that Stefan will be distributed. The non-negotiables are scalable and represent the best practice in that environment. They form the minimum expectation between me and my officer, officers and their firefighters, and other firefighters. If I'm hauling hose and this guy isn't doing it, it's me. I should worry about that, right? All members rely on each other. A firefighter who controls the nozzle must cool the fire gases or smoke, not only for his or her safety, but that of their comrade. Okay, okay, how's it going? Well, the other thing that shits me is he's great on the tools. She knows every piece on the equipment. How often do they say that about a firefighter? No, they say it about a rescue guy, right? This is where I think the Yanks are doing some good. I think that still has some kudos, yeah? If you're an American firefighter, they respect you if you've got skills in that area, right? But when was the last time you heard a firefighter judged by their ability to manage a nozzle or move a hose or pitch and climb a ladder or complete a fast primary search in zero visibility? Which guy do you want to turn up to your house? So how are we going? It's slow. My guys are starting to understand. We do IM pretty well. We have, it's a bit like Steve said before, we can get so many bodies there we basically smother it. But we still have to put the fire out. And we can have all of the IM and all the accountability we like, but when we've got guys in there who lack those skills, we're still going to have troubles. But it's slow progress, but we're getting there. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. There's a document if you'd like to, like I'm saying, I'm still working these things out in my head, right? But you've got to have these conversations. It's about talking. It's about talking with your guys. Ask them what they think. I sit there and say to my guys, you know, I do that. Are you this crew or this crew? Which one do you want turning up to your house? Which one are you? There's the first conversation. Yeah. Okay. Any questions, or is there time for questions? Or?
I think I'm gonna cut it
Yep.
because we're stretching time a little bit. I know that some are leaving this afternoon, and we don't want to stretch this too much. We have 2 more speakers after lunch. John, thank you very much.
Thank you.